Recording live from the Hoban Law Group here in Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Eric Singular. Welcome to the Hoban Minute. Coming at you like a Jason Kidd assist. We're recording live from the Hoban Law Group here in Denver, Colorado. Bob, here we are. It is the week of Thanksgiving, and aside from the little New Jersey Nets shout out, and I don't know what your feelings are on Jason Kidd as a baller.
He's a baller.
But let's just talk for a moment on the things that we're grateful for this year. And I think there's a very weird quality. I don't know if you feel this, but there's a weird quality to going into the holiday season this year, almost because it just doesn't feel like it makes sense that we're already here at the holidays. Time has just been so distorted by the pandemic and everything else, but here we are nonetheless. And so I don't know, I've been thinking a little bit about the things to be grateful for, especially as it relates to the cannabis industry, and interested in what comes to mind for you.
Yeah, no, it's well. First of all, Jason Kidd was indeed a baller, and he was a great playmaker and floor leader, and they don't have a lot of guys that come around like that anymore, and also an excellent coach in the NBA. But things to be grateful for. If you think about it, the economy has been interrupted, but people have generally been able to maintain their employment, except for the unfortunate folks that happen to work in the events industry or the live events industry and the hospitality and the hotel and the restaurant industry. That those folks have struggled mightily, but I think largely it's grateful, and I'm grateful that that we're able to keep the workplace going and keep things moving, and that everyone around us has their health and is assuming and resuming a life that's as normal as possible given the ever-shifting restrictions due to COVID. So it's an interesting time. It's an interesting environment. Who the heck knows what's next, Eric? When you think about states resuming lockdowns, new presidential administration, which incidentally, I was looking today. A lot of people say, why haven't they certified the election? And every state has a different certification deadline, and they're basically just getting underway. So as we move down that process, we will, in all likelihood, have a new presidential administration. There's hope there in the optimism that it's an opportunity to change and to just make make this country a better place and try to move forward with that divide. Maybe getting a little less drastic in terms of politics and people. But otherwise, I'm grateful that even though we got here too quickly, the Thanksgiving holiday will allow me to get together with my family and ultimately be safe and see what tomorrow brings.
What else can you do? There is kind of a flavor of today that's similar to where we were back when we started the podcast, because we are seeing that there's going to be new restrictions in place here in Denver County and in other parts of Colorado due to just soaring COVID rates. And so, I went back and I looked at what we had put together at the very beginning, and kind of a piece that you had written, "Panic is contagious, but so is leadership." And it's interesting to kind of see and reflect on just where we were when all of this started. And of course, one thing to definitely recognize and be grateful for is that essential designation. And then because, or at least, in some way related to the essential designation, when you look at marijuana sales in Colorado and in other states with adult use markets, they haven't been affected by this pandemic in the same way that other industries have. I mean, in fact, we're seeing record numbers as far as marijuana sales here in Colorado. So certainly something to be grateful for this industry. But there is kind of this feeling going into another, not necessarily a stay-at-home lockdown, but something that we know is going to have a big impact on local businesses, small businesses, especially because that federal money and that support system that was there back in the spring, it's kind of dried up. So just,
Obviously, protocols have been put in place, benchmarks to say that if there's this many numbers within a population, you change the policy, the standard at a given time. To your point, things are tightening up a little bit. We're going into the winter. There's been spikes all over the country, and it's a bit surprising to me that we are backtracking. We saw the devastating effect that happened previously. I don't doubt that public health experts are indeed public health experts, and there's models and there's ways that they benchmark these things that make for good recommendations. But I just think that shutting down the economy, putting restaurants in a position where they can't serve indoors is just it's steps back that I don't know if are worth and I think the biggest thing, and we talked about this previously, was the kids that aren't in school. We've seen even in countries with lockdowns all around the world, the children tend to still be going to school in person. And yes, there's risks to all of that, and an analysis that has to go into that completely. But that's another major casualty. Not commenting on that, except to say we've already lost a year of a child's education. Is it worth giving up that and everything else? I don't know the answer. Eric, what do you think about increased lockdowns given the fact that we've been down this road, and then the lockdown was described initially to be an opportunity to build up capacity in their healthcare system? Did we build that capacity up? Didn't we do that? So then this is just the normal. We've talked about this. You don't snap your fingers and make this thing go away. It's here. It's going to continue to be here. So do we have to take such drastic acts to keep it in? And what do you feel about that?
I think it comes back a little bit to this idea around leadership, and as it relates to panic, there's this interesting dynamic around, at least in my mind, that everybody who holds some kind of political office is constantly evaluating how the choices that are laid out in front of them are going to be interpreted down the road, likely when re-election comes up. Everything has to be looked at through this lens of, I'm trying to serve some kind of greater good, and ultimately that greater good always comes at the expense of something else. And it's a challenge, because I do feel that these restrictions are really going to hurt businesses, especially small businesses here in Colorado. And yet I can't help but feel that if the shoes that Polis is in, it's a tough spot to be in for any leader, because you're going to be held accountable for either how many people got sick with COVID, and then of course the resulting death rate, or how many. There's no good way to cut it, and it's always looking at things from that cost benefit analysis. What is going to play better with voters at that time? I think that's part of what makes the political system and in a sense, I don't want to say the show, but it's everything has to be so calculated, and it does stand in somewhat contrast to just making really good, sound decisions based purely on what actually is the best idea. If you didn't have to worry about being reelected, and that's a little bit what we got into around the Supreme Court decision is, does somebody have more latitude in a lifetime appointment position to change, be flexible, and purely make decisions based off of what they really feel is the right idea, because they're not worried about how it's going to be interpreted. So, there is an interesting thing, though, with this change in power that's coming, is the Senate Banking Chair Committee is changing, or the chair of the Senate Banking Committee. And we know that Mike Crapo, the former chair, was not very much in favor of the Safe Banking Act. I think it was around last December where he had maybe pushed back a little bit on the Safe Banking Act. I know that some of the marijuana advocacy groups and some of the lobbyists in D.C. are pretty happy with this new Republican appointee. So there may be some hope for at least businesses in this industry to be finally opening up those pathways that we've talked a lot about to, federal banking services. So that's definitely something to be interested in and kind of watch unfold here in the coming months. On another topic, let's talk for a moment about the businesses that have thrived during this pandemic. And in general, businesses in the cannabis space, whether that's CBD or marijuana or just hemp in general, what is the pattern that you've seen, Bob, with what works? There's a lot of people out here who are trying to start from scratch. They don't know the industry, they see the opportunity, and they come in, and a lot of them fail. And I guess what would you say, as somebody who's been around, an OG as you are, to someone who's looking at the space or who has recently entered the space, and they're trying to figure out how to create a business that's going to be here in 10 years?
I think it starts with context, right? The idea that you understand the environment that you're working within. And context in the hemp industry is extraordinarily challenging because there is no unified central clearinghouse of information surrounding this industry. There is no broadly applicable standard that exists across the board. It has not been commoditized. It has not grown in acreage to be as significant of a player as it needs to be recognized. And because of that, there's people within the industry, and then companies seek to create a blend of people who know and understand the industry, but who also have experience from outside of the industry. If it's ag and the farming side, genetics, bioscience, ag people, farmers. If it's, processing, you want to get someone from the manufacturing world. If it's finished goods, consumer goods, you want a CPG professional, pharmaceutical, so forth and so on. So you bring those people in, and I think they're lacking context from the very get-go about who's done what, where it's worked, where it hasn't. And it pains me to see company after company go at it on their own. And that's the right approach by bringing that diversity from the outside and the inside. But there are patterns here, Eric. There are patterns, there are networks, there are... So the companies that we work with at this law firm are some of the... They've sustained COVID, and their business has been just about as good, if not better, in most instances than it was pre-COVID, because they build out a robust network and a robust distribution system. Companies try to go it alone, and then they end up spending far too much money and not succeeding as a result of that. So it just pains me to see the fact that if they just recognize that there are learned sources, there are aggregators of this knowledge, aggregators of these patterns, observers of the patterns that document those patterns. And it's a lot of what drives what we do here at this law firm and what you and I talk about a lot. But avail yourselves of that knowledge. There are people that know these patterns. Nothing that's happening to you hasn't happened a million times outside of this industry, let alone the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of times within this industry in a short period of time. There are people that can short circuit things and effectively ensure that your company is built in a strong, foundational, and robust fashion to weather these storms. It pains me to see the companies that have tried to do it on their own continue to fail when all they had to do was pick up the phone. And we've seen some big ones go down. Yes, distribution has been restricted. Yes, we don't have regulations from the FDA. But these are things that have existed since the beginning of this industry. And while it is a challenge, it's not an insurmountable one. And unfortunately, it does give a black eye or a black mark to the industry when so many businesses fail. And it seems to be happening more often than I've seen before.
How often do you run into somebody or an organization that is reluctant to outside help because they consider what they have in this industry to be proprietary? And I'll kind of back end that question with this, which is in, let's say, the oil and gas industry, how don't you think that in other industries, the big companies, the leaders in that industry, the titans, don't they share some information with each other every once in a while? What does it look like in other industries, especially as it relates to something that about your business that is quote unquote proprietary? And think about in CBD, think about how proprietary the extraction methods around your product and what makes you special, what differentiates you from all the other brands out there. I'm just interested in how often you run into a conversation where there's a reluctance to bring in somebody else because of this perceived we have to protect and be secretive and be uh, you know kind of not collaborative, and maybe to a detriment.
Yeah, so I think that's because people lack context. They don't understand that what they're doing is being done by 1,000 other people or has been done hundreds of times before and either succeeded or failed for a variety of reasons, and that they can learn that and have a greater baseline jumping point. So when they go out and they don't understand that context, they want to protect everything they have as if it's novel. And there's certainly ways to protect things, right? From a legal standpoint, you got a variety of intellectual property protections available, from patents to trademarks, copyrights, state registrations that have somewhat similar effects, international registrations that are even sort of broader and sometimes more specific. So you can legally protect things. But here's the thing: if you don't have context, you don't know that what you're doing is being done with everybody. So just do it. Don't be so protective, because you're cutting out opportunities to collaborate and create strategic alliances. And if you're not willing to, rely on the courts and or the legal system to protect that, then you're probably overstating your importance, or more importantly, you're not a pioneer or builder of the industry. You're simply somebody who makes the industry better. You're developing technology that is the next phase or makes the industry better, but I don't think you can build an industry on anything other than just basic fundamentals. If I have truly innovative technology, then I can develop that technology, and I should probably do so in a fashion by protecting the IP and aligning with someone who can and make their process better, versus what oftentimes happens in this industry. I've got my new technology, my innovative process, and I want to control my own supply chain too, which is just trying to eat a pizza in one bite, and it's just nuts. So I think that's what leads to a lot of these problems, as you point out.
And then there's this issue of new countries getting interested in this, and then the companies that are trying to lead the way recreating these same problems. So with that in mind, we saw, and I'd be interested for you to talk about this, because I don't think we've ever really heard you talk about it too much on the podcast. Maybe that one time that we had Chris Peruzzi in here, but you were in China a couple of years back, and
2016, yes.
we know that China has been huge on hemp for fiber. That has really been where their focus has been for a number of years. They are the global leader in hemp textiles. What they have not capitalized on is the cannabinoid sector. And so we just recently saw a Chinese pharmaceutical company put out $75 million, or allocate $75 million for CBD research and the really creation of cannabinoid-based products. So when a new market like this opens up, what do you think we can expect to see? And from your experience being in China, what guidance would you put out there?
Well, that's the announcement you read, but certainly the Chinese entrepreneurs, innovators, and even the government hasn't sat idle as it relates to cannabinoids. When I was there in 2016, we toured the southwestern portion of the country, a large city, I think about 12 million people, called Kunming. And then there was a town called Jiaotong, about 3-hour drive to the north, short plane ride, where there was some of the largest industrial hemp farms in the world, thousands upon thousands of acres of that. And, when you saw this, you realize that this is not their first rodeo. And, obviously they've used, that part of the world has used industrial hemp for thousands of uses for thousands of years, and their production is off the charts. But we visited extraction facilities that were state of the art for and many, most of, frankly, Eric, most of the early cannabinoid oil, CBD oil, that was introduced into the United States pre-2014 Farm Bill was derived from industrial hemp. If you look at Project CBD and some of the work that's out there, you'll see documented how some of these earlier movers were sourcing CBD from China and that it was laden with pesticides and heavy metals. Now, that's reflective of a new industry, but also reflective of some concerns about dealing with China on the cannabinoid side. But my point to you is they were at one point a major supplier of this material, and then it became more domesticated because of the Farm Bill, and or it would go through Europe and get transformed. But this is not something new. So the fact that the government has changed policy to allow companies to actually formally do this, not just build out facilities and engage in commerce that isn't exactly regulated by the Chinese FDA, it's a step in the direction of standardizing this, and it begs the question of what does the CBD supply chain ultimately look like? Does China dominate it like it does dominate so many other industries from a supply manufacturing standpoint because of the inexpensive cost of labor and just the fact that they're so vast and have so many resources? That only time will tell, only time will tell. But at the end of the day, it's all plant material. And if the plant material can be grown, processed, and utilized in the closest vicinity regionally, then it's probably the most profitable for the manufacturer and because you eliminate that cost of transportation. So and taxes and tariffs and all these things. So at the end of the day, that's probably how it ends up. But we've got a lot of hemp to grow in the Western Hemisphere before that can happen, because we're just trying to figure out what are the strains that we can adapt to tropical environments, when these Latin American countries, to your point, have sort of jumped into the ring and said, we're going to be major hemp producers. Well, what genetics will work best down there? What genetics will stay within a reasonable range of THC content? So all this stuff's exciting. China will be a major player. Is that limited to regional, dominance, or is it global dominance as they, or at least major, being a major player as the Chinese industries typically tend to do in these supply, botanical resourcing scenarios? Only time will tell. But that's what's great about it, because we can watch it in real time. We can identify what's likely to happen next, because it's all subject to a pattern, and we can chart the growth and the diversification of the hemp industry and its uses, because infrastructure's caught up, and then there's the outlets on the other end.
Yeah, one of the things I've always kind of thought about and not worried about, and not to put it out there as a negative thing, but, for the country that's so economically aggressive, which is China, being the dominant force in the hemp textile space, and you have all these people, all these companies, and all this investment in the U.S. fiber decortication sector. And you just think about the day when we can finally produce that cottonized hemp textile here in the United States. And then what does China do? They'll just drop the price of whatever we're paying now to import, and whatever the cost is. They have no reason to do it right now, because we're not even there yet. To your point, we're still trying to figure out what variety performs in the southern part of the United States. But the day we finally get there, and we think, oh my gosh, we have this success story now of the American farmer who grows hemp for fiber, and in no way to be negative, but you do have this country that is time and time again, with commodity after commodity after commodity, been so aggressive in the marketplace to be competitive, that you just have to think about, what are they willing to do to maintain that hold on their market share? It's definitely something that, if you are one of the people investing a lot of resources and time and energy into hemp fiber, just remember and think about the history that China has had with aggressive commoditization and really just aggressive capitalism. I mean, and you just think about, China's development as a country in the last couple of decades. They've done that with their just rigorous approach to capitalism.
Well, on that point, one thing is for sure: U.S. grown hemp, American grown hemp, The numbers will continue to increase. The infrastructure will be there to support it. There is a new wave in American agriculture based around the industrial hemp plant. And it's small right now. And it's still figuring out what it's going to be and how it can maximize that potential. But make no mistake about it, it will occur. The U.S. will be self-sufficient in a sense by being a significant participant for the foreseeable short and medium term in the industrial hemp space, regardless of the things that you talk about with China. It does, because those are the things that the farmers are driving us towards, and industry and capital markets are starting to see it. And they're saying, well, if the farmers want to grow this because it's a better alternative, it takes less water, it can do all these 50,000 uses, then we better catch up and start building a way to process this stuff. Because the corporations, they're looking at it. They understand how to build this in for packaging, for resourcing, for other materials, for cannabinoid products, for protein, for food, for all the different uses. But all of these things need to develop first. And I believe the U.S. will be a very strong player, even though China's nimble, massive, and quick. I don't know if it can undercut the growth of the U.S. market in, frankly, the next 15 to 20 years.
Well, and it brings up this point, which is interesting because we covered it a little bit when we were talking about the electoral college, which is how important is rural America and rural economies in America, because that is where these kinds of things happen. It doesn't, decortication and large scale grain and fiber processing, it doesn't happen necessarily in Denver, Colorado. It happens in our rural communities in America. Probably get an update pretty soon from Luis Armendariz on what is going on with all of the legislation that's moving through Congress down in Mexico right now. But this story around being able to produce a crop, process it, and turn it into a end consumer good, all without it having to cross oceans, that is a very palpable and powerful story from a sustainability and environmental point. Not having to use and burn coal or gasoline or whatever to move things around the planet, but rather have something and have a supply chain that starts and finishes all right here, whether it's just in the United States or it moves between the countries that are part of NAFTA. And maybe there's some advantage there for a political person out there who wants to run on hemp as this great thing between Canada, Mexico, and North America, and beyond hemp, marijuana, because as we've talked about, we're about to be potentially sandwiched between two countries that have legal marijuana. And on that note, I mean, Bob, just in what you've seen from Mexico in the last week, do you feel pretty positive? Are you optimistic about what's moving forward in the regulations down there, or is there also something? I know there seems to have been some discrepancies or some disputes with some of the hemp related language in the bill down there. Give us a little bit of a light on that.
Just before Mexico, I just want to close out a thought on, this country, we have vast farmland, amber waves of grain. Think about that. It's what this country was built on. And industrial hemp is exactly the kind of crop that fits in with the way the American farmer farms. And we just need the infrastructure to pull that capacity and all of that great ability out of those American farmers. Mexico is exciting because at the end of the day, with Mexico, you're looking at a scenario where from a Supreme Court mandate to a situation where the legislature, the Senate, has moved very quickly to fill the space with medical marijuana, commercial regulations, a pathway to adult use marijuana, and where industrial hemp might be left out of the puzzle there because it allegedly encroaches upon too many other industries. So it's a very exciting thing. And let's not forget, Mexico has, I believe, 135 million people. Whether we're talking 130 or 140 doesn't matter. So it's a lot of people, and this would create enormous opportunities, and it would be able to create revenue streams for the government. I believe from an export perspective, Mexico could then be a major player to source North America, further south into Central and South America and across the ocean as it relates to a variety of these products. So this is the thing that's exciting. Excited to talk to Luis. Excited to get down to Mexico City here sometime very soon, looking at an office space down there that we would share with some great companies in Mexico City in this space that are advising, some real visionaries looking forward to what they're doing and looking forward to participating in this industry. And that's exciting. This is why I've said time and time again, Eric, 2021 is going to be a great year. It really is. COVID doesn't just vanish into thin air, but people are excited. They're building up momentum in this industry. The capital does exist. This is still a growing and emerging industry amongst a number of other industries that are stagnant or flat or, frankly, maybe non-existent given COVID and the economic downturn. So 2021 is going to be really good for those people that plan, that are thoughtful and deliberate, and understanding how places like Mexico and Canada and Uruguay and European countries fit into this is how you plan and how you position yourself, your clients, your connections to do really, really successful and encouraging things in this space. So I don't know. I think it's great. And to think that we have so many states in the U.S. that have enacted marijuana legislation, and our neighbors, as you point out, have created a red, white, and blue sandwich. Something's got to give at some point, and I do believe that something akin to the States Act would be realistic in the third or fourth year of a Biden administration. I think there's a lot of things that need to be done before that becomes a major thing. And then, to your point, you have these collaborations that are regional, and you have real international trade amongst neighboring countries that have trade relations and standards and ways of doing business together. So I don't have to take something from Israel, bring it all the way to Uruguay, and then bring it into Canada or something along those lines, because that's what's happening right now. And while it's extremely interesting and it represents progress, that's quite the haul and extraordinarily inefficient on a global scale.
I couldn't agree with you more on a lot of those points because, for example, to your and I'm glad that we finally got a Bob Hoban projection on when we may see Biden do something. We already saw House Republicans criticizing Democrats for even considering talking about marijuana right now. Of course, being like, we need to be focused on COVID.
I think you'll see decriminalization efforts because that goes into the pressing themes of social justice and racial justice. But I don't think we'll see that other type of legislation advance.
We did see, we talk a lot about the FDA, and the FDA is kind of dragging its feet. The USDA really does seem to be moving forward in good ways. We've seen livestock feed studies funded across the country. We're trying to move in the direction of hemp grain being approved for livestock feed, which would be a great thing for really, I can't see any negative coming from that. And I think a lot of the recent articles about that have kind of echoed that sentiment. We did see the group, I believe it's the National Industrial Hemp, the C is escaping me, but NIHC received a $200,000 grant to go and establish some international relationships as it relates to the advancement and harmonization of hemp. And so just on that note, another thing to be thankful about and another great step of action on the part of USDA to start to fund the mechanisms that are really going to make hemp become the competitive agricultural commodity that we both know that it is. It's just it takes a long way to get there. And somewhere to get back to this discussion about proprietary, how often in other industries is there a reliance on university-backed research, these private-public partnerships, this idea that, yes, some things are proprietary, but a lot of great advancements, it isn't one company over here doing all of these things. It's working with universities, it's working with researchers, it's getting grant money, fund money, and this is this comes back a little bit to the center of excellence conversation. What was trying to be developed here in Colorado to spur the hemp industry was creating a coalition where you're bringing all of these different parties together that you ultimately need in order to really build an industry to its true potential. So,
Yeah, I think that the importance of university or research institution partners is so critical on so many different levels for this plant. On one level, from a scientific and medical and chemical compound perspective, you need to understand what's in the plant, how it interacts with the human body, how those things interact with each other. The basic elements of what you can do from a medicinal food wellness standpoint or chemical standpoint, because there's certainly a number of other compounds within the plant, the lignans, the cellulose, the sugars that can be utilized, not just for human consumption, but for industrial uses or durable good type uses. But what's interesting is here's how, in a nutshell, a university can literally drive the development of an economy. So it's not just those specific projects, but it's elements of it. Lubbock, Texas, home of Texas Tech University, a major fiber. It's cotton country out there. So Texas Tech has been a major fiber research institute and partner for many of these companies that deal in textile fibers and industrial fibers from cotton. Now, Lubbock, Texas is also a dry, arid region where it's very flat. There's not a lot of rainfall, and of course, water becomes more scarce as the temperature warms and as more people move into certain areas. So you look for another crop. So Texas Tech reaches out and says, we'd like to examine the industrial hemp plant to be a potential replacement. There's a 14%, I'm just making that number up, difference in water consumption, so it's more efficient. It has qualities. We all know what hemp fiber can do. Can we retrofit? Can we take the machinery and just retool it so it can process hemp instead of having to build out hemp-specific machinery or the like? What's an efficient way to do it? Are there ways to wet decorticate? In other words, get the plant to degum and have the fiber separated without running it through heavy mechanical processes. So that research happens. It's happening right now. At the same time, the researchers somewhere else in Texas are looking at water consumption and validating that. At the same time, the legislature is out there passing laws that allow farmers to plant this stuff. At the same time, different genetics are being tested and acclimated in the region, and infrastructure is being looked at. So all these things happen, but it happens in large part because the university, which has nothing to lose because that's what it does, it studies things. It certainly needs budgets for things, but it studies things, it researches things, it figures out how to integrate and retool. Those partners are essential because it validates the fact that this plant is what it is and that the processes actually can be functional and work together to create a supply chain. Otherwise, it's just private actor after private actor after private actor saying, I built this, it's great, it'll do this for you. And that very well may be true, but it doesn't necessarily come from the most objective source because that person's trying to succeed. So that's another reason why you need university partners. And the science, we keep hearing science matters. Don't disregard science. Science surrounding industrial hemp absolutely matters because it's a lost art. It hasn't been grown on any level of notoriety in the United States because of the laws since the 40s, technically, with the Hemp for Victory campaign. So we got a long way to go. And with modern technology, with research and just, current events such as drought conditions and, this is the perfect storm. But without those research partners, without the universities contributing and driving the discussion, the politicians are just going to hear what companies say as an opportunity for that company to make money for themselves. And that doesn't always bode well for a solid foundation.
Well, and that is certainly another place where an organization or a group like Gateway Proven Strategies or Hoban Law Group can help connect with those research partners. Or, again, that comes back to this recreating the wheel versus tapping in and using the institutional knowledge that is there to help you actually succeed. Because, as we touched on so much at the very beginning of all of this, this is the time for collaboration. This really is not the time to hunker down and become overly protective and against, working with others because you think that that's what's going to help you or save your business during this time. This is the time to be a little bit more open-minded, likely. Just coming back to tie this thing off and land in a place of gratitude, it's been an absolute pleasure. And even though, we don't get to see her very often on the other side, obviously, to work and to get to do this with you, Halston, Bob, you, of course. It's really been a highlight of the pandemic and just of 2020 to think about all the time that we've spent in this room, sitting together and getting to talk about all of this. Certainly something I'm grateful for, and really looking forward to, what it will become and what it will grow into the future, because we're just at the beginning.
This has become, in a sense, a Wednesday night tradition for the three of us, and by extension, other colleagues and friends that have come through, and that was especially important, and that was something I really appreciate and am thankful for, is the fact that not only that we've produced this great content and made all this progress here, but this was a way that we made it through those early COVID days when we were all locked down. And then, everybody was free and happy because it's the summer and we can run around Colorado outside, and all of a sudden things are changing again. So here we are in a scenario where the Wednesday night tradition for the next 3 to 4 months will probably be our most exciting outlet, aside from getting out on the snow a little bit. And God darn it, I hope they don't shut that down.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, definitely a lot to be hopeful for, I think, in 2021. And I absolutely agree with you, Bob, that I do think that 2021 will be a great year. Does it mean, we're going to be through this pandemic, then there will be...
Does it mean that everything's just going to go back to quote-unquote normal? Of course not, Eric. It's not. There's no such thing. But it's going to be better. It's going to be good. And you can make it good by appreciating what you have now, and next week's the perfect time to do that. Whether you're getting together with your families or trying to do these virtual Thanksgivings, you'd have to connect with people, and this is a good time to do it. Be grateful for what you have, and look forward to next year, because next year will be a very good year. And even though it's not going to resemble years gone by, or what we just wanted to go back to initially, it all represents change and progress, and then the spring will be here again, and life is good.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Hoban Minute. Do you have any ideas for episode topics or guests? We would like to hear from you. Reach out to us at media@hoban.law, and stay tuned for more on the Hoban Minute.